See, if politics is the art of the impossible, I think Edapadi Palaniswamy is an artist par excellence. Because he came with a surprise element. Now, I would say that he is in a way flourishing in a very surprising way. Nobody thought that this man would become one day become chief minister. Many people, many people even who followed politics closely didn't know that there existed a man in AIDMK called Edapadi Palaniswamy. But from that, he started off on a very slow and uncertain note. The first 2 years, I would say it was very bad. From a business perspective, from a governance perspective. When I say bad, I mean that it was a very inert and unsure and uncertain chief minister and an uncertain government. But after 2 years, the third year, I would say that he has turned himself around, turned around the style of governance, and in a way the perception of of investors, and generally the perception of how Tamil Nadu is perceived as a big state with a considerable GDP, which has a big say in the scheme of things nationally, in terms of politics, in terms of business, in all spheres, I would say. So we could look at this in two ways. I think one, you could see that EPS has proved in his third year as one of the successful chief ministers in a way. Or you could say that he has proved that you don't actually need much of a political acumen or a governance administrative acumen to really run a state like Tamil Nadu. Because there has always been a theory that, which is true, partly true, that Tamil Nadu always had a robust bureaucracy. Unlike many other states, this state has gone through great political turmoil. This state's state's government had been dismissed twice. Its former chief ministers had gone to jail. So there have been a gripping crisis, but then the state has withstood all those things. So it has a history, a tradition of tiding over crisis, irrespective of politicians being in power, or sometimes in spite of some politicians of questionable reputation being in power. So EPS, in a way, so whatever be, is it his acumen or lack?
I think as a politician, he's been very successful. He may not be the politician who's articulate with his thoughts, but in terms of rustic and political intelligence, he stands much higher on a scale than compared to his contemporaries in the Dravidian politics right now, I would say. Because I would see it from this point onwards, right from the time he led his alliance talks for the Lok Sabha polls, where the BJP was trying to pressure the ADMK into accepting it as a main leader of the alliance and give for itself more seats so that it could apportion it among the smaller allies. He ensured that the BJP got only 5 seats, and 2 of the allies, the New Justice Party and the Pudhi Tamilkam, actually contested on the ADMK symbol, and that allotment was made by him. Similarly, he bent backwards to rope in the PMK and the DMDK. He considered 7 Lok Sabha seats and 1 Rajya Sabha seat to the PMK. Though the PMK was a very strong critic of the government, I think anybody else in his place would not have wanted this alliance. But he digested all the insults that the PMK threw at him and still gave them 7 seats plus 1, because he realized that they were necessary not for the Lok Sabha election but more for the assembly by-polls in those 22 constituencies. And ultimately he has managed to win 9 of those 22 constituencies and retained his government. Today his government is in a very safe zone, which means it will run its course till 2021. I think that is essentially his rustic intelligence, because he is a grassroots politician, someone who came up by the hard work, and he knew what it takes to actually survive in politics, and that he has achieved. And although his party managed to get only 1 seat in the Lok Sabha polls, he honored the commitment he made to the PMK of giving a Rajya Sabha seat, which I think in his place Jayalalitha would not have done, because the party drew a blank, the PMK drew a blank in the Lok Sabha polls. But he honored that, keeping in mind the next 2 by-elections that the state would face in Vikramandi and Naganeri. Of course, in Naganeri the PMK is not a force, but in Vikramandi I think aligning with the PMK, keeping that alliance intact, really paid off. And soon after the Lok Sabha polls, if you notice another thing, when the Rajya Sabha polls came in and the ADMK could nominate 2 persons, they ensured that one of them was a Muslim candidate from Vellore, and the other one was a low-level functionary, Chandrasekharan. Essentially retaining Jayalalitha's style, saying that we will nominate people who are loyal to the party. And with that, he managed to convince the electorate in Vellore that the ADMK may not be an enemy of the Muslims, though it allied with the BJP. They managed to keep the BJP away from campaigning in the Vellore and reduce the victory margin of the DMK by about 8,000 odd votes, which is a huge thing considering that just about 3-4 months ago, the DMK and its allies won with margins unthinkable of 3 lakh plus in many constituencies. So that he achieved. And subsequently, he won the 2 by-polls with very significant margins of over 35,000 and 40,000 votes, whereby people who thought that the ADMK could be written off after the Lok Sabha polls had a rethink now. And it also ensured that the DMK may not have an easy walk when it comes to winning elections, and they really have to fight to retain the control that they had, the dominance that they had in the politics of Tamil Nadu. So that way he's been very smart. I would even take it one step further, looking at the local body polls that are going to happen tomorrow and on the 30th. Here, although it was Edappadi Palaniswamy who reversed Jayalalitha's decision of holding indirect polls to the post of mayors and chairpersons in cities and municipalities, the moment he realized that apportioning seats is not going to be an easy task, and that the allies might do some arm twisting, they might seek some mayoral seats and many chairpersons of municipality seats that they would like to, they may demand, and in the process that might actually upset many ADMK party man. He chose to go in for indirect polls with no logic at all. There's no logic for the government changing its stand, but he did that, and now the seat sharing talks have been very smooth within the ADMK allies, and he gave an impression that the DMK is afraid of the local body polls, although the DMK went to court on specific grounds, some of which are reasonable in the sense that a delimitation exercise was not carried out in accordance with law, and therefore they went to the court. But the impression that the people have got is that the DMK is hesitant to face the election, and that the ADMK is, has got an upper hand. That's the impression.
I was recently talking to a foreign investor who had invested more than 2,000 crore in Tamil Nadu. He was saying, it is the executive director of that company in India. He was saying in the first 2 years they were all scared because after J. Jayalalitha passed away, they didn't know where to go, what to do, how to do business. They were all at the cusp of expanding their businesses, but they didn't know how to go about. There was a complete paralysis, they said. But the same person tells me that after 2 years, after 2.5 years, he says that now the government is active, it's accessible, they know now they are expanding their business, they have invested in another, they have committed to another 1,000 crore. So what I hear from investors and businessmen is at least there is a perception that governance is back on rails. And if you look at the numbers also, I'm not a great fan of these MOU signing, but if you look at the numbers in black and white, that's what we are left with. GIM 1, which was signed, GIM as in the investors meet, the global investors meet presided over by Jayalalitha, brought in about 2.42 lakh crore, or that was the promise made by investors, potential investors. EPS actually overtook her. If you look at it, if you look at the numbers, 3 lakh crore. It is another fact that it's another matter that out of the 2.42 lakh crore promised to Jayalalitha, only 66,000 crore actually materialized in terms of MOUs, and many of which are yet to roll out in terms of on-the-ground production manufacturing units. So we'll have to wait and see how much EPS government would be achieving on the ground. But if you look at the numbers, as I said, he has done better, so to say, than Jayalalitha, probably in the last 4 or 5 years government. So I think it was a surprise element on both these fronts in terms of building a perception, as also actually having some investors hitting the ground running.
Yeah, of course, he did manage to have this global investors meet, the second edition of it, although it was much delayed. He managed to hold it, and of course, the figures given out by this government say that they had far exceeded, what Jayalalitha did with the GIM 1. That was in 2015. And then he followed it up with his own foreign visit very recently, where he went to the US and the other places to attract investment. But only thing is, in terms of the numbers, of course, they've shown some huge numbers which make it appear as if a lot of industrialists and the global players are actually flocking to Tamil Nadu. But in reality, if you see the delivery, or even when he went to Dubai, One of the companies that he tied up was an auto company that has actually based its operations in Chennai also. Though they were headquartered in Dubai. So it's an Indian company with rootings there. So we have to wait to see how this translates. That is why the DMK has been demanding a white paper, and I think a white paper is called for in this particular issue, because we need to know which are the companies that came, because there were some claims that even some big ticket investments, like in the infrastructure project and other things, which companies had announced on their own, they were made to wait till the GIM 2019 for it to translate into some MOUs. So therefore, I think the government should come out with more numbers on this, because even now, if you see, although the governance index, the Tamil Nadu government stands number one in the composite figure, the figures that came out yesterday. They have delivered in terms of public delivery issues like the health sector or the infrastructure issues here. But when it comes to the investment climate or the economy, the state is still few notches lower than the other states of similar size. Therefore, I think an investment, although he did create an impression that he was on top of it, I think much more needs to be done on the ground, and the government must be more transparent and tell us more about the companies that have come in here and the scale of investments they have made, the actual jobs, if at all, if they have translated to that level, or a time frame by when these could be these assurances would translate into action.
2019 was also the year when, especially Chennai, the capital city, faced a very bad water crisis. Reminiscent of probably Jayalalitha, when Jayalalitha was in power, we had a crisis like this. And I would say that the government could do. It is a fact that some of the mismanagement of our water managers and the government had contributed to the water crisis. But once we woke up to the crisis, I would say that the government was not bad. There was some action on the ground, like bringing water by the rail. Of course, it's nothing compared to the demand, which is about the Chennai city of 9 million population would need about 750 million liters a day. We were not even getting half of it. But then some effort was being made, and as also the perception we created that something is being done. And thankfully, of course, rain came after 198 days of dry days. Then it comes to the PWD works, the Kudimaramat work, as the Chief Minister calls his pet project. I think a lot of groundwork has been done. I would not compare this government with some of the previous governments, like in the early 90s, like the Jayalalitha government of 91, 96, or later Karunanidhi government. That is a time when post-liberalization, Tamil Nadu, as part of a greater wave, we're riding a crest of a greater wave. We made great strides, but so I would not dare to compare that era with this. But if I compare the last 3 years, I would say that 2019 has been a year of good performance by EPS. He surprised us, partly also because a person like me, I never expected EPS, who came from nowhere, to perform so much. So he has surpassed the expectations. I would give him 7.
The Kudimaramatu is a very good scheme. I think that is his pet project, and he has successfully implemented it, because some desilting exercise has gone on in different water bodies across Tamil Nadu, because people get to take the silt and sell them also. So that way the Kudimaramatu, he has actually paid much attention to it and ensured that it has reached the interior villages also. The drought, I would say that initially the government did flounder, because they did not declare it as a water emergency, or they did not tell the people that there is indeed a water crisis in Chennai. They were in a denial mode till the very end. Because I think the reason why the government should declare a water emergency, or should have declared or informed the people, is people would have been more judicious in using water. When you are reading reports about apartments and even individual households getting water once in 20 days, 25 days, the government insisted that there is nothing to worry in Chennai. And of course, later on, they did bring water from Jolapet by train. It was not a novel idea as such, because Jayalalitha had done something similar in the early 2000s when we met with Chennai had a major water crisis. At that point, she had brought water by train from Mettur, as well as by tankers from Viranam in the northern Tamil Nadu part. So he followed that model and then brought it, but I think they stepped in a bit late on that. They should have done this much earlier. They did it late, and they brought it. And then later, of course, they were lucky that they had some monsoons in between, and the rains really improved the position. And it was much later that the Chennai Metro Water declared that the city is now in a water safe situation. So that shows that the government, I think it was aided by the monsoon in dealing with the drought. Otherwise, from my point of view, the government really failed to sensitize people on the enormity of the water scarcity Chennai faced at that point.
As much as he had taken control of the government, I think EPS has taken control of the party also. So 2019 was also a year of coming back with great power for EPS, and he did it very silently, very subtly, and I would say that very strategically. Who else could turn a rebel into a subservient lieutenant? O. Paneerselvam, who sat as a rebel, what he called the Dharma Yuddha, is now completely a shadow of EPS. He's eating out of EPS hands. So I think that is a great achievement. And he made him the convener of the party. He rejigged the bylaws of the party, and he made him the convener, the steering committee convener, giving OPS a feeling that he is holding the wheels, but actually he was not. And slowly yet steadily over 2 years, EPS showed to OPS and all his detractors that this is the way the government would be done. The message was very clear that you try to sink the ship, we all sink, we all drown. It's not, I'm not going to fall alone, we all are going to fall. So that really worked. And it not just worked, but people have kind of realized it, and especially people like Paneerselvam and others who have been with OPS have realized that there is no go but to support EPS. I think that is his biggest political victory. Having said that, I wouldn't say that when he goes to elections, it's going to be a different ball game altogether. He has won the game within the party very well, but then when it goes to the 2021 elections, which is not next year but the coming year, it's going to be a huge challenge, because all that he has won may not be enough in the sum of the game of politics when it comes to taking on the might of Stalin and an invigorated DMK. Especially when new players, we really don't know what Rajnikant and Kamal are going to do, how they're going to play havoc in the scheme of things. So EPS has an unknown factor which he has to face in the coming elections. So far, he has been able to put his house in order, but when he enters the battle, it's going to be a different ball game altogether.
And do you see Shashikala impacting the AIDMK or EPS's leadership?
I wouldn't hazard a guess on what would be the outcome when Shashikala comes out of prison, but it's definitely going to create some ripples within the AIADMK. May not be the entire political spectrum, but then within the party it is going to create some realignments at times. But much would depend on whether EPS would be able to hold on to the system which he has created so far. He has put in place a system that now it doesn't allow Shashikala to come and take over, because the bylaws have been changed. One has to be a full-time member of the party for 5 years. So those things have been very strategically done. But having said that, with the death of Jayalalitha, we have seen the entire bylaws and the system and the general council and the whole organizational setup of the party going topsy-turvy, being turned on its head. So anything can happen that way. That will much depend on how subservient the AIADMK leaders who have been subservient to Shashikala will continue to be at the sight of her walking out of the jail.
I'm not sure if Shashikala will come out of prison before her term ends, because the kind of income tax reports that we are seeing about how she used demonetized currency to actually make huge transactions worth about 1,700 crores or something like that on that scale. I think these reports are coming in. Definitely, it may have a bearing on her release from the prison. So most probably she might complete her course in prison and she would come out. But when she comes, I'm doubtful whether she'll be able to take control of the ADMK. Although even now you have some of the ministers in the Edapadi government who are pro Shashikala, who have not criticized her at all. Like for instance, Sengotayan, OS Manian. These are ministers who have been in the ADMK government, but they've never criticized Shashikala. Some of them have even remotely spoken in favor of her. Some have hinted that when she comes out, she will eventually lead. I think Edapadi Palaniswamy has fairly consolidated himself within the ADMK, though O. Paneerselvam, his deputy and the party coordinator, appears to be a man who might be more popular, who might seem more popular than Edapadi Palaniswamy when it comes to the people. I think within the party organization structure, he has fairly managed to consolidate his own hold there. and that the fact that Mr. Pannirselvam sought a seat for his son, and Mr. Pannirselvam steered himself away from giving a seat to his own son in Salem, shows that he has more or less convinced the party men that he would reward loyal workers and he is more dependable than Mr. Pannirselvam. And definitely there will be a situation where the ADMK has to move towards a single leadership. This dual leadership mode is not going to work on a long-term basis because eventually when there are two leaders, they'll have differing interests, and that will come to dominate the course which the party takes. So at some point there'll be a tussle, and where Edapadi has to prove himself even more, work harder to consolidate himself. But Sasikala, the point is, even if she comes out, I don't think she has public goodwill. Unfortunately, what has happened is, people have separated Jayalalitha from Sasikala. They think Jayalalitha was a do-gooder, she was a woman of will, she was somebody who was clean in politics, but they see Sasikala as somebody who's been evil and who's been responsible for Jayalalitha's downfall. But in reality, if you look through the Supreme Court judgment also in the disproportionate wealth case, it clearly says that Jayalalitha was the A1 and she entered into a conspiracy with A2, who is Sasikala, and then went on to accumulate wealth. But the public perception is that Sasikala is an evil force. I don't think that perception is diluted.